Welcome to another cozy night of diving into The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, and this is illustrated by Jemima Catlin. The Hobbit. Chapter 1. An Unexpected Party. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down or not to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. It had a perfectly round door, like a porthole painted green, with a shiny yellow brass knob in the exact middle. The door opened onto a tube-shaped hall like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel, without smoke, with paneled walls, and floors tiled and carpeted, provided with polished chairs and lots of pegs for hats and coats. The hobbit was fond of visitors. The tunnel wound on and on, going fairly but not quite straight into the side of the hill. The hill, as all the people for many miles round called it, and many little round doors opened out of it, first on one side and then on another. No going upstairs for the hobbit, bedrooms, bathrooms, cellars, pantries, wardrobes, kitchens, dining rooms, all were on the same floor, and indeed on the same passage. The best rooms were on the left-hand side going in, for these were the only rooms to have windows, deep-set round windows, looking over his garden, and meadows beyond, sloping down to the river. The hobbit was a very well-to-do hobbit, and his name was Baggins. The Bagginses have lived in the neighborhood of the hill for time out of mind. People considered them very respectable, not only because they were rich, but also because they never had any adventures or did anything unexpected. You could tell when you had an adventure or did anything and could not. And Baggins would say any question without the bother of asking. This is a story of how Baggins had an adventure and found himself saying things altogether unexpected. He may have lost the neighbors' respect, but he gained, well, you see whether he gained anything in the end. The mother of our particular hobbit. What is a hobbit? I suppose hobbits need some description nowadays, since they've become rare and shy of the big people, as they call us. They are, or were, a little people, about half our height, and smaller than the bearded dwarves. Hobbits have no beards. There's little or no magic about them, except the ordinary, everyday sort, which helps them to disappear quietly and quirkily when large, stupid folk like you and me come blundering along, making a noise like elephants when they can hear a mile off. They are inclined to be fat in the stomach. They dress in bright colors, wear no shoes because their feet grow natural, leathery soles and thick, warm brown hair like the stuff on their heads, have long, clever brown fingers, good-natured faces, and laugh deeply, fruitly laughs. Now you know enough to go on with it. As I was saying, the mother of this hobbit, of Bilbo Baggins, that is, was the famous Belladonna Took, one of the 3 remarkable daughters of the old Took, head of the hobbits who lived across the water, the small river that ran at the foot of the hill. It was often said in other families that long ago one of the Took ancestors must have been a fairy wife. That was, of course, absurd, but certainly there was still something not entirely hobbit-like about them. And once in a while, members of the Took clan would go on and have adventures. They discreetly disappeared, and the family hushed it up, but the fact remained that the Tooks were not as respectable as the Bagginses, though they were undoubtedly richer. Not that Belladonna Took ever had any adventures after she became Mrs. Bungo Baggins, most luxurious hobbit hole for her. That was to be found under the hill and over the hill or across the water, and there they remained to the end of their days. Still, it is probable that Bilbo and her only son, although he looked and behaved exactly like a second edition of his solid and comfortable father, got something a bit queer in his makeup from the Took side, something that only waited for a chance to come out. The chance never arrived until Bilbo Baggins was grown up, being about 50 years old or so, and living in the beautiful hobbit hole built by his father, which I've just described to you, until he had, in fact, apparently settled down immovably. By some curious chance one morning long ago in the quiet of the world, when there was less noise and more green, and the hobbits were still numerous and prosperous, Bilbo Baggins was standing at his door after breakfast smoking his enormous long wooden pipe that reached nearly down to the woolly toes. Gandalf came by. Gandalf, if you've heard of only a quarter of what I have heard of him, and have only very little there's to hear, you would be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. Tales and adventures sprouted up all over the place wherever he went, in the most extraordinary fashion. He had not been down that way under the hill for ages and ages, not since his old friend Old Took died. In fact, the hobbits had almost forgotten what he looked like. He had been away over the hill on businesses of his own since they were all small hobbit boys and hobbit girls. All that unsuspecting Bilbo saw that morning was an old man with a staff. He had a tall, pointed blue hat, a long gray cloak, a silver scarf over with his long white beard hung down below his waist, and immense black boots. "Good morning," said Bilbo, and he meant it. The sun was shining, the grass was green, but Gandalf looked at him from under his long bushy eyebrows that stuck out further than the brim of his shady hat. "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you wish me a good morning, or mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or that you feel this is a good morning, or that this is a morning to be good on?" "All of them at once," said Bilbo, "and a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco out of doors into the bargain. If you have the pipe about you, sit down and have a fill of mine. There's no hurry. We all have the day before us." Then Bilbo sat down on a seat by his door, crossed his legs, and blew out a beautiful grey ring of smoke that sailed up into the air without breaking and floated away over the hill. "Very pretty," said Gandalf, "but I have no time to blow smoke rings this morning. I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure that I'm arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone." "I should think so in these parts. We're plain folk here, and no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. It makes you late for dinner. I can't think of anything worse," said our Mr. Baggins, and stuck out thumb behind his braces and blew out another even ring. Then he took out the morning letters and began to read, pretending to take no more notice of the old man. He had decided that he was not quite as short and wanted him to go. But the old man did not move. He stood leaning on his stick and gazing in the hobbit without saying anything, till Bilbo got quiet, uncomfortable, and even a little cross. "Good morning," he said at last. "We don't want any adventures here, thank you. You might try the hill or across the water." By this he meant the conversation was at an end. "What a lot of things you used to do good morning for," said Gandalf. "Now that you mean what you want to get rid of me, and that it won't be good until I move off." Not at all, my dear sir. Let me see. I don't think I know your name." Yes, my dear sir. I do know your name, Mr. Bilbo Baggins. And do you know my name, though you don't remember that I belong to it? I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me. To think that I should have lived to be good morning to by Belladonna Took's son, as if I was selling buttons at the door. Gandalf, good gracious me, not the wandering wizard, that gave old Tuck a pair of magic diamond studs that fastened themselves and never came undone till unordered? Not the fellow who used to tell such wonderful tales at parties about dragons, and goblins, and giants, and the rescue of princesses, and unexpected luck of widows' sons? Not the man that used to make such particularly excellent fireworks. I remember those. Old Tuck used to have them on Midsummer's Eve. Splendid, they used to go up like great lights, and snapdragons and labradums of fire, and hang in the twilight all evening. You will never notice already that Mr. Baggins was not quite so prosy as he liked to be. Also, he was very fond of flowers. Dear me, he went on, not the Gandalf, who was responsible for so many quiet lads and lasses going off into the blue for mad adventures. Anything from climbing trees and visiting elves, or sailing in ships, sailing into other shores. Bless me, life used to be quite you used to upset things badly in these parts once upon a time. I beg your pardon, but I had no idea you were still in business. Where should I be? Said the wizard. All the time. I am pleased to find you remember something about me. You seem to remember my fireworks kindly at any rate, and that is not without hope. Indeed, for your old grandfather took sake, and for the sake of poor Belladonna, I will give you what you asked for. I beg your pardon, I haven't asked for anything. Yes, you have twice now. My pardon I give to you. In fact, I will go as far as to send you on adventures. Very amusing for me, very good for you, and profitable too. Very likely if you ever get over it. Sorry, I don't want any adventures. Thank you. Not today. Good morning. But please come to tea any time you like. Why not tomorrow? Come tomorrow. Goodbye. With that, the Hobbit turned and settled inside his round green door, and shut it as quickly as he dared. Not to seem rude. Wizards, after all, are wizards. What on earth did I ask him to tea for? He said to himself. He went to the pantry. He had only just had breakfast, but he thought a cake or two and a drink of something would do him good after this fright. Gandalf, in the meantime, was still standing outside the door and laughing long but quietly. After a while up, he stepped up and went with a spike on his staff, scratched a queer sign on the Hobbit's beautiful green front door. Then he strode away just after the time when Bilbo was finishing his second cake and beginning to think that he had escaped adventures very well. The next day, he had almost forgotten about Gandalf. He did not remember things very well unless he put them down on his engagement tablet, like this: Gandalf, tea, Wednesday. Yesterday, he had been too flustered to do anything of the kind. Just before tea time, there came a tremendous ring on the front door bell, and then he remembered. He rushed and put on the kettle, and put on another cup and saucer, and an extra cake or two, and ran to the door. I'm so sorry to keep you waiting, he was going to say, when he saw that it was not Gandalf at all. It was a dwarf with a blue beard tucked into a golden belt, and very bright eyes under his dark green hood. As soon as the door was opened, he pushed inside just as if he were to be expected. He hung his hooded cloak on the nearest peg, and Dwalin, at your service, he said, with a low bow. Bilbo Baggins at yours, said the Hobbit, too surprised to ask any questions for the moment. When the silence then followed had become uncomfortable, he added, I'm just about to take tea. Pray come and have some with me. A little stiff, perhaps, but meant it kindly. And what would you do if an uninvited dwarf came and hung his things up in your hall without a word of explanation? They had not been at a table long. In fact, they had hardly reached the third cake when came another, even louder ring at the bell. Excuse me, said the Hobbit, and off went to the door. So, have you got here at last? That was what he was going to say to Gandalf this time, but it was not Gandalf. Instead, there was a very old-looking dwarf on the step with a white beard and a scarlet hood, and he too hopped inside as soon as the door was open, just as if he had been invited. I see they've begun to arrive already, he said when he caught sight of Dwalin's green hood bin, Young, his red one next to it, and Balin. At your service, he said, with his hand on his breast. Thank you, said Bilbo, with his gasp. It was not the correct thing to say, but they had begun to arrive and had flustered him badly. He liked visitors, but he liked to know before they arrived, and he preferred to ask them himself. He had a horrible thought that the cakes might run short, that he, as the host, he knew his duties and stuck to it, however painful he might have to go without. Coming along in, have some tea, he managed to say after taking a deep breath. A little beer would suit better. It is, after all, the same to you, my good sir, said Balin with the white beard, but I don't mind some cake. Seed cake, if you have any. Lots, Bilbo found himself answering, to his own surprise, and he found himself scuttling off, too, to the cellar to find a pint of beer, then to the pantry to fetch 2 beautiful round seed cakes which he had baked that afternoon for his after-supper morsel. When he got back, Balin and Dwalin was talking at the table like old friends. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. Bilbo plumped down the beer and the cake in front of them, when aloud came the ring, and another ring. Gandalf for certain this time, he thought, as he puffed along the passage, but it was not. It was 2 more dwarfs, both with blue hoods, silver belts, and yellow beards. Each of them carried a bag of tools and a spade, and they hopped as soon as the door opened, when Bilbo Baggins was hardly surprised at all. What can I do for you, my dwarves? He said. Killy, at your service, said one, and Filly, added the other. They both swept off their blue hoods and bowed. At yours and your families, replied Bilbo, remembering his manners this time. Dwalin and Balin here already, I see, said Killy. Let us join the throng. Throng? Said Mr. Baggins. I don't like the sound of that. I really must sit down for a minute and collect my wits and have a drink. He only had just one sip in the corner, while the 4 dwarves sat round the table and talked about mines and gold and troubles with goblins and trepidations of dragons and lots of other things which he did not understand and did not want to, for they sounded much too adventurous. And when ding-dong, the bell rang as soon as his naughty little Hobbit boy was trying to pull off the handle. Someone at the door, he said, blinking. Some 4, I should say, by the sound. Besides, we see them coming along behind us from a distance, said Filly. The poor little Hobbit sat down in the hall and put his head in his hands and wondered what had happened, what was going to happen, and whether they would like to stay to supper. Then the bell rang again, louder than ever. He had to run to the door. It was not 4 after all, it was 5. Another dwarf had come along while he was wandering in the hall. He had hardly turned the knob before they were all inside, bowing and saying, At your service, one after another. Thori, Nori, Ori, Oin, and Gloin were their names, and there were soon 2 purple hoods, a grey hood, a brown hood, and a white hood were hanging on the pegs, and off the march were they broad heads stuck into the gold silver belts to join the others. Already it had almost become a throng. Some called for ale, some called for porter, and one for coffee, all of them for cakes, so the Hobbit was kept very busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had just been set with the hearth, and the seed cakes were gone, and the dwarves were starting a round of buttered scones. When they came, a loud knock, not a ring, but a hard rat-tat on the Hobbit's beautiful green door. Someone was banging with a stick. Bilbo rushed along the passage, very angry, and altogether bewildered and beweathered. This was the most awkward Wednesday he ever remembered. He pulled open the door with a jerk, and they all fell in, one on top of the other. More dwarfs, 4 more, and there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He had made quite a dent on the beautiful door. He had also, by the way, knocked out of the secret mark he had put in there that morning before. Carefully, carefully, he said. It's not like you, Bilbo, to keep friends waiting on the mat. And then open like a pop gun. Let me introduce Biffer, Boffer, Bumper, and especially Thorin. At your silvers, said Biffer, Boffer, and Bumper, standing in a row. Then they hung up 2 yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky blue one with a long silver tassel. This last belonged to Thorin, an enormously important dwarf. In fact, no other than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who was not at all pleased of falling flat on Bilbo's mat with Boffer, Boffer, and Bumper on top of him. For one thing, Bumper was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin indeed was very haughty, and said nothing about service, but poor Mr. Baggins said he was very sorry so many times that he last grunted, "Pray don't mention it," and stopped frowning. "Now, we're all here," said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, and the best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the peg. "Quite a merry gathering. I hope there's something left for the latecomers to eat and drink. What's that? Tea? No, thank you. A little red wine, I think, for me." "And for me," said Thorin. "And raspberry jam and apple tart," said Biffer. "And mince pies and cheese," said Boffer. "And pork pie and salad," said Bumper. "And more cake, and ale, and coffee, if you don't mind," called the other dwarfs through the door. "Put on a few eggs, there's a good fellow," Gandalf called after him as the Hobbit slumped off into the pantries. "And just bring out the old cold chicken and pickles." "Seems to know as much as about the inside of the Landers as I do," thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed, and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not come right into his house. By the time he got all the bottles, and the dishes, and the knives, and the forks, and the glasses, and the plates, and the spoons, and things piled up on big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face, and annoyed. "Confucius Satan people are those dwarves," he said aloud. "Why don't they come and lend a hand?" Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dwalin at the door of the kitchen, and Philly and Killy behind them, and before he could say knife had whisked the trays and a couple of small tables into the parlor, and set everything out afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party, with the 13 dwarves all around, and Bilbo sat at a stool at the fireside, nibbling at a biscuit, and trying to look as if there was perfectly ordinary and not in the least of an adventure. The dwarves ate and talked, and time got on. At last they pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. "I suppose you'll stay to supper?" he said in the politest, unpressing tones. "Of course," said Thorin, "and after, we shan't go through the business till late. We must have some music first. Now, to clear up." Thereupon the 12 dwarfs, said Thorin, he was too important, and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet, and made tall plates of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on the top, with one hand, while the Hobbit ran after them, after squealing with fright. "Please be careful, please don't trouble, I can manage," but the dwarves only started to sing. "Chip the glasses and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Smash the bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloth and tread on the fat. Put down the milk on the pantry floor. Leave the bones on the bedroom mat. Splash the wine on every door. Dump the crocks in a boiling bowl. Pound them up with a thumping pole. And when you've finished, if any hole, send them down the hall to roll. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. So carefully with the plates." And of course, they did none of these dreadful things, and everything was cleaned and put away safe as quickly as lightning, while the Hobbit was turned round and round in the middle of the kitchen, trying to see what they were doing. They went back and forth, Thorin with his feet on the fender smoking a pipe. He was blowing their most enormous smoke rings, and wherever he told him to go, he went, up the chimney, or behind the clock, the mantelpiece, under the table, or around the ceilings. Wherever it was quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! He went a smaller smoke ring from his short clay pipe through the one Thorin's. Then Gandalf's smoke ring would go green and come back to hover over the dun light to make him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood still and watched. He loved smoked rings, and then he blushed to think how proud he had been yesterday morning of the smoke rings he had sent to the wind over the hill. Now for some music, said Thorin. Bring out instruments. Killy and Filly rushed for their bags and brought back little fiddles. Dori, Nori, and Ori brought out flutes, for some were inside their hall. Bifur and Buffer went out too, and left among the walking sticks. Dwalin and Balin said, Excuse me, I left mine on the porch. Just bring mine in with you, said Thorin. They came back with vials as big as themselves, and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin stuck in the music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else. He was swept away into the dark lands under strange moons, far over the water, and very far from his hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from the little window that opened in the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and still they played on, while the shadow of Gandalf's spear wagged against the wall. The dark filled all the room, the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on, and suddenly first one and then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places of the near ancient homes. And this is like a fragment of their songs. It can be like their songs without their music. For over the misty mountains cold, to dangerous deep and caverns old, we must away at break of day to seek the pale enchanted gold. The dwarves of your mighty spells, while hammers feel like ringing bells, in places deep where dark things sleep, in hollow halls beneath the fells. For ancient kings and elvish lord, there many a gleaming golden hoard, they shaped and wrought, and light they caught, to hide in gems in hilt of sword. On silver necklaces they string the following stars, on crowns they hung the dragon fire, in twisted wire they meshed the light of moon and sun. For over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away at break of day to claim our long forgotten gold. Goblets they carved there for themselves, and harps of gold where no man delves. There they lay, and many a song was sung unheard by men or elves. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were mooring on the night. The fire was red, it flaming spread, the trees like torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, and men looked up with faces pale. The dragons, the more the fierce than fire, laid law, their powers and houses frail. The mountain smoked beneath the moan, the dwarves they heard the trump of doom. They fled their hall to dying fall, beneath his feet, beneath the moon. Far over the misty mountains grim, to dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away at break of day to win our home, our harps and golds from him. As they sang, the hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hands, by cunning, by magic moving through him, a fierce and jealous love the desire of the hearts of dwarves. Then something tookish woke up inside him. He wished to go and see the great mountains, and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves, and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked outside of the window. The stars were out in a dark sky above the trees. He thought of the jewels and the dwarves shining in dark caverns. Suddenly in the wood beyond the water a flame leapt up, probably something lightening a wood fire. He thought of plundering dragons settling on his quiet hill, kindling into all the flames. He shuddered. Very quickly he was plain Mr. Baggins of Baggin Underhill again. He got up trembling. He had less than half a mind to fetch the lamp, and more, and half a mind to pretend to and go on and hide behind the beer barrels into the cellar, and not to come out again until the dwarves had gone away. Suddenly he found that the music and the singing had stopped, and were all looking at him with eyes shining in the dark. "Where are you going?" said Thorin, in a tone that seemed to show how his guest both halves of the Hobbit's mind. "What about a little light?" said Bilbo apologetically. "We like the dark," said the dwarves. "Darker for dark business. There are many hours before dawn." "Of course," said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool and sat in the felter, knocking over the poker and shovel with a crash. "Hush," said Gandalf. "Let Thorin speak." And this is how Thorin began. Gandalf, dwarves, and Mr. Baggins, we are met together in the house of our friend and fellow conspirator, the most excellent and audacious hobbit. May the hair on his toes never fall out. All praise to his wine and ale. He paused for a breath and for a polite remark from the hobbit, but the compliments were quite lost on poor Bilbo Baggins. He was wagging his mouth in protest at being called audacious, and worst of all, fellow conspirator. Though no noise came out, he was so flummoxed, so Thorin went on. "We are met to discuss our plans, our ways, means, policy, and devices. We shall soon, before the break of day, start on our long journey, a journey from which some of us, perhaps all of us, may never return. It is a solemn moment. Our object is, I take it, well known to us all, to the ensemble Mr. Baggins, and perhaps to one or two of the younger dwarves. The exact situation at the moment they must require a little brief explanation." This was Thorin's style. He was an important dwarf. If he had been allowed, he would probably have gone on like this until he was out of breath, without telling anyone that anything that was known already. But he was rudely interrupted. Poor Bilbo couldn't bear it any longer. At may never return, he began to feel a shriek coming up inside, and very soon it burst out like the whistle of an engine coming out in a tunnel. All of the doors sprang up, knocking over the table. Gandalf struck a blue light on the end of the magic stick, and its fireworks glare struck. The poor little hobbit could be seen kneeling in a hearth rug, shaking like a jelly that was melting. Then he fell flat on the floor, kept on yelling, struck by lightning, over and over again. And that was all they could get out of him for a long time. So they took him and laid him away from the drawing room sofa with a drink at his elbow. They went back to their dark business. "Excitable little fellow," said Gandalf as they sat down again. "Gets funny queer fits, but he's one of the best, as fierce as a dragon's pinch." If you've ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you'll realize this was only a poetical exaggeration applied to any hobbit, even to old Took's great-granduncle, Bulwer, who was so huge for a hobbit that he could ride a horse. He changed the ranks of the goblins Brown of the Battle of the Greenfields, and knocked their king, Gulfilbul's head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 years through the air, and went down a rabbit hole. And this is the way the battle was won, and the game of golf invented at the same moment. In the meantime, however, Bulroar's gentler decadence was reviving in the drawing room. After a while, a drinky crept nervously to the door and parlor. This was the hurt Gloin speaking of. Humph, or some snort, more or less like that. Will he do you think? Being fierce. But one shriek like this is a moment of excitement would be enough to wake the dragon and all his relatives and kill a lot of us. I think it sounded more like a fright of excitement. In fact, if it had not been for that sign at the door, I should not have been sure we had come to the wrong house. As soon as I clapped my eyes on this little fellow bopping and puffing on the mat, I had my doubts. He looks more like a grocer than a burglar. Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Took side had won. He suddenly felt he would go without bed and breakfast to go through fierce. As for little fellow bobbing on the mat, it almost made him really fierce. Many a time afterwards, Baggins part regretted what he did now, and now said to himself, Bilbo, you were a fool. You walked right into it and put your foot in it.